Hello, everyone. This is Fatima Gul. I'm Executive Director in the American Political Action Committee, and we have a very special guest here, and we are going to have a very informational interview, and a conversation with the president of Sindhi American Political Action Committee. He is the, main person behind this organization. He's the one who envisioned it. Um, he is the founder, and he has remained the president throughout of this organization. He's the one who um, put the whole vision, what we really want to achieve through this organization. So it was mainly his vision, and then other friends joined him and supported him with his with this cause. So I feel very grateful that to have him as a president and someone I can look forward to. And throughout all these years, he has guided me, supported me, and encouraged me, because I have worked under a lot of other leaders and a lot of experiences. You do jobs and you work in organizations, but it's always a blessing to find a leader like Dr. Maqbool Halepota, where you feel comfortable, and where you feel like feel good when you give your 100%. So it's always a pleasure working with him. So what we are going to do today is I will request Dr. Halepota to speak about himself, his journey, SAPAC, so he can give you a little bit of information about himself and Sindhi American Political Action Committee. And after that, what we are going to do is we will go and do round one. Round one will be about Sindh. We will be discussing various issues related to Sindh. And then the second round will be, we will dive deeper into SAPAC, what we are doing and what we can do better, and what is Dr. Halepota's vision for our organization. Does that sound good? Okay, perfect. I will request Dr. Maqbool Halepota to please speak to us.
Thank you very much, Fatma. I don't know if I deserve all the accolades, but I'll take them. So just to give everybody a little bit of a background, I think SAPAC was incorporated or started, registered actually, around 2008, 2009, I think. So we've been in existence for about 12 years. And I was the founding president, and at that time, our executive director was Sufi Lagari. And we've had some friends, to work with us initially. Some have left, others are still with us. The motive behind starting SAPAC was that, we have a reasonable number of Sindhis who live in America. And we have a number of non-profit Sindhi organizations that are mostly social or maybe socio-political, and they've been working in the country for a long time. But we felt that the main issue of the human rights of Sindhis and all the other problems, which were more political in nature and much more urgent in nature. And it's not just the human rights. We felt that it is all the challenges that Sindh as an entity is facing. It's challenges to Sindh's geographical entity. It's the challenges to our ecology with the destruction of the river Indus. It's the very existence of our ethnic, our linguistic entity. And this was a time when I think the collaboration between the government and in Washington, D.C. and Islamabad was much closer, and there was billions of dollars being sent in aid to Pakistan. But we felt that it was not being distributed uh, equally in Pakistan. Plus, we felt that the government there, the administration, was using these funds, and a lot of times even the military aid that they were getting from the United States to suppress its own people, especially the minorities within Pakistan, which includes the religious minorities, the ethnic minorities. And when we thought that, and that was a very sensitive issue, which none of the other social nonprofit organizations were willing to delve into because of their own constitutional restrictions and because of their nonprofit status. So we felt that we should have a political action committee working in Washington, D.C. with the decision makers just to make them aware that there are some internal issues in Pakistan that need to be addressed, because that was the motive behind started this. And when we started working in Washington, D.C., we were I personally was amazed at the lack of knowledge that even some of the highest decision makers in Washington, D.C. had about Pakistan, because everybody kind of thought of Pakistan as one country where everybody spoke exactly the same language, they dressed exactly the same, they had exactly the same historical background, same religious values, and the typical image of a Pakistani in those days, and maybe still was, that of a angry, male with a long beard, burning the American flag and saying "Down with America, death to America." And we explained to them that that's not what Sindhis are. Sindhis, not only Sindhis, they are. If you look at the history of the country, Pakistan before it came into existence in 1947, it there were different sub-nationalities which had lived as separate entities, and they had decided to join the Confederation, which was the original idea of the country. It has since then been in an attempt to homogenize everybody. There's been a deliberate attempt to crush the historical entities, and that was our biggest challenge in Washington, D.C., explaining to people, the decision makers, that don't look at Pakistan as just one homogeneous society. It consists of very different nationalities with different values, different religious values, different ideas, different philosophies. For instance, we as Sindhis have always taken pride in the fact that Sindh has never seen any religious or ethnic violence before the last, since 1947, because Sindhis have always taken pride in a very mystical, in a Sufistic way of looking at religion, where all religions come together, everybody practices a religion, but people lived in peace. And that was the point that we're trying to get across, that while the United States was trying to fight, the extreme version of jihadi mentality, they were funding the government, which was actually then funding the madrasas in Pakistan that was teaching that jihadi mentality and destroying the local Sufistic, the mystical, versions of religions that had been practiced in those areas for thousands of years. So that was the whole idea behind SAPAC. And I think we've come a long way in the last decade or so in explaining that to the decision makers. We have seen some visible changes. The last time I was, a couple of years back, I was in Pakistan and I visited the consulate general in Karachi, and he had a Sindhi ajrak and a Sindhi cap, like the typical cultural artifacts of local Sindh. And I think the decision makers are beginning to realize that in order to even try to win the hearts and minds of people in that area, they have to speak to them in their own language and speak to each of the entities and treat them with the respect of treating them as individuals, not part of one group, which has been in a way, caricaturized. I don't know if that's a word or not, but in the modern media. So I think we've done a good job, and thanks to Adivati, she's, people who are in Washington D.C., because I live in Arizona and it's impossible for me to give the amount of time and energy that people who live in Washington D.C. can. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still issues. I'm sorry I'm taking a little long, but I'll tell you the biggest issue that we've dealt with in the last few years, in fact, in the last 5 to 10 years, is the idea of forced abductions by the government of Pakistan, where young men are taken away without any warrants, without any judicial orders behind it. They're taken away in the middle of the night from their homes, and many times they go missing for months, years. There's still people that are missing, that have been missing for years, and a lot of times when they're returned, they don't come back alive, but what is returned is their mutilated, tortured bodies. So we have openly spoken against the fact that these forced, enforced disappearances and these abductions by the government agencies are not legal. Even if these people have done something wrong, they do deserve a day in front of a judge. There has to be a judicial process. That process cannot be circumvented. So, and there were actually people who were speaking against that practice, and they were abducted by the government agencies until some of our, especially Congressman Brad Sherman spoke against that on the floor of the House, and then they were released. So that number of people being abducted has gone down. Number of young men being tortured to death and their bodies being thrown in the streets has gone down. So I think we have saved, number one, by reducing those practices, and bringing that to the attention of the decision makers here. We've saved actual lives of young people who otherwise would have lost their lives. Number two, that level of fear that was being created by that tactic has also gone down, which has encouraged other people to then speak up. But it is not that, but it has not been eliminated completely. It's still happening, and until those practices continue to happen, until these human rights are being trampled, literally, I think our work will not be done here.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have come a long way, and I remember, Dr. Maqbool Halepota, he kind of in the very beginning he saw that what work we are doing here in Washington D.C., how those people, the victims of enforced disappearance and their families, somehow they were getting some sort of relief by, because the person we were creating awareness about the persons, somehow because of this pressure here in Washington D.C., because we were organizing a lot of events. The big name is like Akib Chandio, a 17-year-old boy, and Dr. Maqbool Halepota was, he identified that the work that we can do over here, through Congress, it's significant, and we can see some results on the ground, because they were letting these, people, these innocent people who they abducted and tortured for years, they let them go because of the pressure that was created here in the Congress. So very good, points. I would encourage Michael. Michael, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and you can ask your question.
Hello, my name is Michael Kale. I'm a team member here at the Sindhi American Political Action Committee. I just wanted to first start off by saying thank you to Dr. Halepota for meeting with us. The fact that although there are only 3 of us here right now, but all 4 team members, we work very closely together, and we really were very interested and excited to be able to meet with you, the president and founder of SAPAC, and then just be able to ask you questions and learn more about this great organization. For me, a little background about myself. I'm a rising senior at the College of New Jersey. That's just outside of Trenton, New Jersey, but I'm actually from Northern New Jersey. At TCNJ, I'm a political science major, and I minor in law, politics, and philosophy, which is TC&J's pre-law minor. But I'm interested in foreign affairs and international relations and dealing with, different cultures, different societies, and, just being able to get more experience in that. And, that's part of the reason why I joined SAPAC. I know, during the entire, COVID-19 crisis at the beginning of May or April, when it was going on, Fatih reached out to me and, asked me if I was interested in this internship. And, at first I needed to do some more research into SAPAC because I really I've never heard of SIND before this. And, the fact that all of these human rights, abuses were occurring in this country in the year 2020, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it because, many of us, almost are coddled living in the United States with, all the freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech. So that's my main driving force for why I joined SAPAC, is just because, first of all, I want to learn more about, just all of these, just the information, but also all the human rights abuses going on. And, even if it's because this internship is only 2 months long, but if in those 2 months we're able to, just get a little more work done in achieving our overall goal, I think, that was really my driving force. At SAPAC, a little work that I have done is I've been working on scheduling meetings with a number of New Jersey congressmen and women from my state. Obviously to reach out to the members of their staff to try to schedule these meetings. And the goal is to, hopefully get them to join the Congressional Sindh Caucus, which is now going on 10 years, a 10-year celebration. And then I've been writing 2 articles for the newest July issue of the Sindh Guardian, one on the malnutrition in children in Sindh, and the second one on the enforced abductions and forced conversions of young Hindu and Christian girls in Sindh. I've also written a letter to the editor of the Huffington Post on the current COVID crisis occurring in Sindh and how there are many relations for the current COVID crisis to the last year's HIV crisis in Sindh, and how the government of Pakistan really hasn't been dealing with either issue in any way, shape, or form. And then just finally, just any additional work that is needed. I of course welcome additional work. And then I've been working on just an information sheet for the 10-year celebration for the Congressional Sindh Caucus, and just going back and looking at past speeches, just past information that has been given in order to help, just spread awareness of the issues occurring in Sindh.
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. I wonder if Dr. Halepota has any question.
No, that was excellent. I think that was very good. That's the kind of work we need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful, Michael. Go ahead and you can ask your question from Dr. Halepota.
Okay. Yeah, so the first round of questions, like we said, are dealing with Sindh. And, based off of my research, as well as, the research of the other team members and Fatih, like I said, there are many vital issues needing to be dealt with in Sindh, whether they're extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, forced conversions of young girls, malnutrition, droughts that are, destroying food supply. There are a number of issues. But, what I wanted to ask you as the president of SAPAC is, of all of these issues, because I'm not saying that the one issue is more important, but for you, which issue do you believe needs the most attention and awareness from the international community?
So I think they are all very important issues, and I don't know how to prioritize them. I think human rights is obviously the biggest issue in Sindh, and we have to, because I think one of the things that I've just actually been very concerned with over the last few days is that I think what is happening with this whole COVID crisis, because most governments and in fact most international agencies are so preoccupied with their own issues, that I think this practice of abducting the political workers by the government agencies has gone up significantly, according to some reports that I've received, because I think the local agencies believe that they are not under the same level of watch that they were. So human rights is always a very big issue. But the other issue that I think is also a great issue is the very the survival of Sindhi language and culture, because in all the schools and the colleges, before 1947, Sindhi language was a medium of instruction up to master's level, and that is being eliminated at every level, right? And the third, I think, is the ecological disaster with all these dams that are being built on River Indus, because Sindh depends on the river for its very survival. If the river is completely choked off, then that, because Sindh, most of the economy in Sindh is agro-based, that whole agricultural economy is going to be destroyed. Plus, the delta of the river is going to be destroyed. So that is, all this. I don't know if you guys probably know this or not. It's the delta of River Indus in Sindh has the largest areas, acreage of mangrove forests, and they are being destroyed. There are species, of marine species that are only indigent to in River Indus, like the famous case is, and you guys can Google this, is the blind dolphin in the River Indus, which is going extinct. So so then you add the political deprivation with the human rights, with the destruction of the indigent local culture and language, and then the biggest, I think the biggest problem which the government, that the world has to realize, which we've always struggled with, is the local the belief systems of Sindhis, which is, most Sindhis are practice Islam, but they have a unique version of Islam. Most of them are Sufis. And the Sufism is a derivative of the mystical versions of all other Abrahamic faiths, like the Kabbalism in the Judaic beliefs. And and that is where, which the primary philosophy is that of peaceful coexistence. It is not a version of religion that teaches you that you're different from others. It's actually where people are taught to find similarities with everybody else, and use religion as a venue for finding connections with people of other faiths. Because the thinking is, in the end, we all follow the same, entity, whichever you want to call it, right? So when that idea of a pluralistic religious faith is destroyed and replaced by a very extreme jihadi mentality, that's creating problems not only for the locals, but eventually that is going to affect the rest of the world, as we have seen in the past. So I would say human rights, the destruction of the river with construction of all these dams, and the other, I think, other big problem is the unchecked, influx of people from other areas. And nobody, in this day and age, you cannot seal borders, and migration is part of process, has always been a part and process of the human condition. But if you look at history, anytime there's migration without assimilation, that always results in conflict. The problem here is that number one, there's unchecked migration. Number two, the establishment is actually encouraging the immigrants not to assimilate, because they are being told they're only Pakistanis, there's no such thing as a Sindhi. After the creation of Pakistan, you have no right to even call yourself a Sindhi. And that, I think, is, so if you combine all of these, you combine the ecological disaster and the economic repercussions of that with unchecked immigration, with no assimilation, and destruction of the local peaceful philosophy of coexistence and being replaced with extreme versions of religion, I think it's a time bomb, which is just, getting ready to explode. And God forbid if that ever happens, that is going to be one of the biggest disasters that the planet is going to see. And so we have to do everything possible to try to prevent that. And the way you prevent that is by making everybody else aware that it's not just a local problem. It's like if a person has, and I'm an oncologist by profession, if a person is developing cancer in one part of the body, you don't ignore it, because eventually it may be affecting that one part of the body, but eventually it is going to affect the rest of the body. And that's why the rest of the human race and the world needs to be made aware about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Halepota, and thank you, Michael. I would say, Carrie, how about you go next and introduce yourself and ask your question?
So my name is Carrie Penix. I'm a team member of SAPAC and Mississippi University. It's at Mississippi, and I'm majoring in journalism and public relations. And I have like a huge interest in media, and I'm just Fatty contacted me about SAPAC. I was very interested in it because I interested in international before. I thought that this was very different from what I was used to because I have never heard of Sindh before. I've never heard of Sindh, Pakistan. And I just wanted to learn more about it and to see what kind of, like, I've never heard of anything like extrajudicial killing, especially in first appearances. I thought it was all really interesting and just something to look at. And especially, I didn't know that there was so much bias in the media, especially in Pakistan. Like, I've been looking at some of the articles, and it's like they purposely try to distort different types of facts, try to just push their agenda, and I think it's very and it's basically my introduction. And my question I wanted to ask you is based on sin. So, were issues such as enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and forced conversions as common when you were growing up in sin as they are now?
So that's actually a great point. So Sindh, since the creation of Pakistan 1947, has gone through some very rough periods, and in between there have been some breaks. So if you look at it in 1947, the overall population of the what is currently Pakistan, which was West Pakistan, and those it was called West and East Pakistan. The overall population of Pakistan in those days was what, 20 million? I think 20 million people, and now it is 200 million. Right? If I've got my figures right. So the population, so what happened was that when Pakistan was created, there was a huge influx of migrants from India. And 99% of them, or maybe 90% of them settled in Sindh. And those Sindhi, especially Sindhi Hindus living in the cities of Sindh, were literally forced to migrate to India, because their houses were being burned, their businesses were being burned, and their lives were being threatened. So I would say maybe that was the most traumatic phase. And then after that, there was actually a time when the government of Pakistan declared the 4 current provinces of Pakistan, which were part of then West Pakistan, as one unit. And they said they totally banned the languages or even anybody calling themselves a Sindhi. So they were all being forced into one unit, one province, kind of, that everybody had to be governed by from Islamabad, Rawalpindi, or where. I think it was, I'm not sure what the capital was in that time, I think Lahore, but it was from the northern parts of Pakistan. And I think, but then they were after that when East Pakistan left and Bangladesh was created, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was a Sindhi, was elected a prime minister of Pakistan. And I think the Sindhi people got some relief because he was the prime minister for about, what, 7, 8, 9 years, 7 years, I think, 6, something like that. And then he was hanged in a fabricated case. And then we went through a martial law under Ziaul Haq for 11 years, where, you know, during that martial law, there was a very famous movement called MRD movement, the Movement for Restoration of Democracy, which is when I was a medical student in Karachi. And this was probably the worst time that the Sindhis faced, because military operations were used and villages were destroyed and thousands of people were killed because they were struggling to have, they wanted an end to martial law and they wanted restoration of democracy, which is what the Movement for Restoration of Democracy was about. So I would say, but then since then there have been periodic times, and if you look at the history of the country, Pakistan has been under martial law for more than about 50-60% of its time of existence. Right now, although there's not openly declared martial law, but for all practical purposes, everybody knows that the country is pretty much running under a martial law, where all the political opponents have been forced to leave the country or have been forced to, remain silent. And those abuses are increasing, because if you look at the history of the country, anytime there is democracy, that the people, the common man in the street may get a little bit of a relief, but under martial law, there is no concept of human rights. So this may not be the worst time, Kerry, but I think it is probably one of the worst periods. But the difference is what is happening there right now is not overt. It's all being done in a very occult way, where it's not visible. Because you talk about media, if on the surface, there are hundreds of channels, but all of them are constantly being monitored and censored. Where journalists are being abducted, killed, shot, and they are afraid to speak in it. As it is, I think you brought a great point. In the mainstream media, which is controlled by, mostly in Urdu language, there is a bias against Sindhis. Now you start with a biased media, even that biased media is so controlled that it's impossible for the Sindhis to get their point to the surface because of all the censorship on top of the bias. But you're right. I mean, so these conditions, the civil rights conditions in Pakistan have gone up and down depending on the, I would say, directly proportional to the level of democracy that is being practiced. I don't know if there's ever been a full democracy, but there were times when the political forces did have the upper hand. And maybe in those days, the human rights were not as bad, although the human rights abuses continue even during democracy. But in martial law, overt or occult, the level of human rights goes down significantly. And I think we are definitely on a downward trend in the country.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dr. Halepota. Even in Pakistan and in Sindh, we have seen the worst times. But then, if we see the education, our health system, our infrastructure, everything has slowly gone down. And that has been the biggest concern, the way things are changing in Sindh. So Jack, I want you to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Absolutely. Dr. Halepota, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I, like the other team members, really appreciate the opportunity you've given us to work at SAPAC. I don't want to harp on the lack of awareness that most Americans have about Sindh, but when I first learned that Pakistan had 200 million people in it, I was blown away. And I think part of the problem that you see in the United States is Americans really don't understand how big the world is. And until they respect the realities of how big the world is, these problems are just going to persist. I've been working on researching forced conversion marriages and inviting researchers to forced conversion marriages webinar that we're hosting July 20th, and writing articles for the Sindh Guardian and whatnot. I'm a rising senior at UMass Lowell. I'm studying economics and finance. My past internship experience has been more like finance related, but coming into adulthood at such a confusing time really made me want to do something more socially oriented. And this was the perfect opportunity. So I'm really grateful. And I guess my first question would be, what aspects of the United States do you wish were more present in Sindh? And which aspects of Sindh do you wish were more present in the United States?
So, if you look at the relationship of the United States with Pakistan, it's been kind of a love-hate relationship. When India and Pakistan were separated, United States was one of the first countries that recognized Pakistan. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan then, Liaquat Ali Khan, was invited to speak to the Congress here. In those days, because the world was a bipolar world, there was the Soviet bloc, the Russian, and then the kind of the Western bloc. It was the Democratic bloc versus the Communist bloc is the way, at least when we were growing up, that's what was, always ingrained in our brain. So India was actually pro-Russia, pro-Soviet Union. It was, they were the more, leftist or whatever you want to call them, the idea. And Pakistan was always very supported. There was a time when the United States actually had Air Force bases in Pakistan. And then there was a falling out for whatever reason until the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in the 80s. And that love affair, was reignited. When I was growing up, we used to have U.S. consulates and U.S. cultural centers where young men were encouraged to go and learn about America and all of the kind of. But it was more, there was very little, attempt to understand the local culture. It was more to teach the local cultures what America was. And that is whenever I was growing up, would go to the U.S. consulate and sit in the cultural center, I would be shocked by, there was no mention of what Pakistan was or what the entities in Pakistan. But anyway, so then after the Soviet Union, the U.S. and the rest of the world supplied Pakistan with money and weapons and everything, and the Afghanis to fight off the Russians until the Soviet Union was forced out. But then that love affair kind of turned into not a very pleasant experience when the Taliban started, protecting and hiding and giving protection to Al Qaeda and all that. And then that whole thing happened, and suddenly, Pakistan had become the main, because Pakistan underhand were actually supporting the Taliban. So that thing again went, in the opposite direction. But they were getting a lot of aid. Pakistan was receiving a lot of military and non-military aid in that whole time. I think right now that relationship has cooled down. It's not, as warm as it was between the U.S. and Pakistan, which is a good thing, but not in some ways, not a very good thing, because as long as there were billions of dollars going from Washington, D.C. to Pakistan, Washington, D.C. had more leverage on how they could control some of the abuses locally. But still, even if there is still, and so right now the aid may not go from U.S. aid, but it is going through IMF, right? So there's still a lot of influence that the decision makers in Washington, D.C. can yield on Pakistan to try to put some control. So what Americans, I think what we can do as Americans is learn more about the diversity of cultures in Pakistan and understand the differences between the different nationalities, their values, and how you approach them individually and speak to them in their own language. That's why we've been trying our best to get some program started in Sindhi on Voice of America, That's our way of reaching out to them in their language and communicating with them. And as far as Sindhis in America, those of us who live here, I think the best we can do is get more politically involved. There's Sindhis that live everywhere, in every city, every state. They just need to get involved if they really care about about those back home, and if they are hurt by the abuses, that they see on, it may not be on, but on main media. But the beauty of social media is, I think very soon, what we call mainstream media is going to be irrelevant. Because kids your age hardly, my kids your age, and they hardly ever watch television anymore. They get their information from their iPhones or whatever the smartphones they have, which is I think is a good thing. People may not like it, but I think it's a good thing. So I think we need to educate the Sindhis in the U.S. to get more involved, not just socially, culturally, but politically, which has been the biggest problem. Our challenge is that, and this happens anytime. Most Sindhis that live here are people who are first generation, who immigrated themselves, and these people are so busy in the economic survival that they cannot see beyond that. So what we need to do is tell the Sindhis in this country, it's not just about you winning, getting some food on the table for your children. There has to be more than that to your lives, which is to be politically involved so that you can stop the abuses, not the human rights abuses, and all kinds of other abuses, with the destruction of the economy, the destruction of the ecological systems. We have to get the Sindhis involved here politically. And then we have to, the Americans there have to learn, to differentiate between the different entities within Pakistan.